Welcome to Just UX. Welcome back to people who have already subscribed. I'm super excited today because we're going to be teaching you how to build the best possible button components using Figma and their new features like component properties, variants, etc. It's going to allow you to build a simple component where you can modify things like the icon instances, the text strings, the interactive states, all from within the components panel and without having to drill in and mess around with any nested layers. One thing that I would do before we jump into designing is definitely clone this design system foundations file, which you can find on Figma community. This is going to contain all of the color styles and the typographic styles that we're using in the tutorial, and it will just make it a little bit easier for you to follow along and save you a lot of time if you're building your own design system. It's completely free, so definitely go and clone that. Once you've cloned it, just make sure that you've published it, and then you can toggle it on. So I've turned on the library here, so I have access to all of the styles that were published there. All right, jumping into design, before we actually start moving pixels around, let's just consider how we want to structure our components and what type of states and button types we need. So in terms of structure, each button we want the possibility for it to exist as a text-only button, i.e. it has text and no icons, the most common type of button. That'll be typified by something like this share button in Figma. Secondly, we want an icon left variant where you're just going to have an icon and then preceding the text, and that's it. We want a right icon, which you can use for maybe a drop down button, something like that. So it's just going to be your text and then your right icon. And then lastly, we want the icon only button, which would be, represented like something like this team library button, where it's just a ghost button with just an icon in the middle. So no text, just an icon. Then for interactive states, we want to have the default state before it's been engaged with. We want the hover state when you're mousing over the button. Active state, actually we don't want an active state, we want a pressed state, so that's when you're actively pressing down on the button. And a focus state is when it enters into focus for people who are tabbing through on a keyboard, just to make sure that we have accessibility options spec'd out. Button types is slightly different, so these are the different stylistic types. So we can style buttons differently to communicate their position on the hierarchy. So primary would be the most important action, then secondary. Outline buttons as well are really useful for a more subtle button, and ghost buttons finally would be buttons that have no background, but they still have that padding and the clickable area and the other interactive states. Again, example being something like this icon only button up here. Anyway, so now we've got some rough map of what we want to actually design, including the button types, the states and the structural variants. So let's jump ahead and start building our button. The first thing we want to do is use the frame tool, and we're going to drag out a frame that's 40 pixels high. Width isn't going to matter too much because we're going to use auto layout, and we're going to give it a fill of green 500 and a border radius of 8, just to give it a little bit of curve, make it a little bit smoother. I'm going to go ahead and hit T for the text tool, and type button, which will be our placeholder text. And then we're going to go over to the text panel and drill down to body medium and go for a semi-bold text layer in the button. So yeah, that looks good. We're going to have 8 pixels at the top and bottom, and then we're going to go ahead and hit Shift A just to wrap this in an auto layout. You're going to see over in the auto layout panel, the horizontal padding is 31. That's a bit much. We're gonna drill that down to 16. So this is looking pretty good. And yeah, this is already kind of a decent button. Next thing we want to do is create our other structural variants. So left icon, right icon, and icon only. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the assets panel. Let's just drop in. We can drop in any icon because we can swap them out. By default, it's set to 40 pixel size, which is way too big. We'll drop it down to 20 and use the regular variant of the icon. And I'll drop it into the auto layout. Now, immediately you can kind of see that this doesn't look right. It's because the auto layout is set to the top. We want it in the center, so that'll balance it out a little bit more. We also want the icon itself to be white and not black, to match the text. But also you see padding for an icon button is always different from the padding for a text only button. You don't want so much room on the left because it just looks unbalanced. So what you can do is click this button here, which is independent paddings, and we're gonna drill this down to about 10 pixels, and we're going to remove some of the padding in between the icon and the button. We'll remove that down to 4 pixels. So that looks good. And that would be our icon left variant. And we're going to do the same thing for the icon right. So we'd have 10 here, 16 here. Yeah. And then finally, just figure out how to do the icon only one. Okay. Again, want to drag it to 40 pixels, make sure that's fixed, and we'll set a fixed width at 40 pixels and yeah, and then we can add 10 pixels on each side, and then yeah, make sure that you have 10 pixels on the left and right padding and 10 pixels on the vertical padding, and then it's going to be 40 by 40. And I'll just set it to fixed anyway, because you don't really want this button to move. It's not like there's dynamic text content that are going to push around the sizing. The icon's always going to be 20 pixels, so it's all good to have it fixed. I'm going to do the same for the height of these buttons, because even though they're going to dynamically shift in width, we want them to remain fixed in height. And it's just useful to do that. All right, and now what we would have done historically maybe is create a different component variant for each of these options. But we can actually create a single button component that will represent all of these variations. It's just going to take a little bit of messing around. So, doom. I'm just doing my maths brain, so we're going to increase the mid padding here to 6. And that still looks good, but it's going to allow us to do something nifty with the button component. So let's take this component, and on the button itself, we're going to wrap this in an auto layout, remove the top padding, and set this to 6. Now, on the sides, instead of 16, we're going to add it, we're going to reduce it to 10. This means this looks identical to this component, but actually some of the padding is hidden in the text, but the side padding is only 10, which is what we're using for the icon only variants. So that means I can go ahead and drag an icon. I've dragged that into the wrong. I can drag the button in here. Just make sure this is set to 0. Yeah. Make sure this is set to the side, the auto layout is set to left alignment in the center. And there you can see it looks identical, because we've got the main base padding is 10 on each side, but then you've got an additional 6 pixels applied on the auto layout on the text layer. And that means we can turn on and off this icon and the structure will be how we want it. Now we can do the same thing for the icon right. So if we remove the left icon, it's looking good, as it did over here before I stole the icon. And we can also go ahead and hide the auto layout with the text, and it's going to be perfect 40 by 40 button as we specified for our icon only variant. So we can go ahead and delete these now actually. And we've got this, which is like our core base button. I'm just going to tidy up the layer name, call this text wrapper, call this button, left icon, and right icon. Cool, and we'll show both icons by default. I'm going to now create this as a component. So this is now a component, and now we can go ahead and apply some component properties so that we can do those modifications to the structure all from the properties panel. So let's go ahead and highlight the left icon. First, we'll set up a layers property, which will just allow us to toggle on and off the icon. So we'll just call it left icon, and we'll leave it as false by default. While it's still selected, I'm going to go ahead and choose an instant swap property as well. So we'll go icon left instance, and it's fine to have it as activity by default. Actually, I'm going to go ahead again and just turn on the left icon so we can see what we're doing. And then we'll do exactly the same thing for the right icon. So first layer, and then the icon instance swap. I'm going to change it on the right because it's weird how it will just differentiate it a bit if we have a different instance on the left and right. Be a bit easier. So let's go for like chevron right. Oh no, that's huge. It's given us the 40 pixels. I'm not. Let me just test if that's going to happen every time we swap the icons. No, it's fine. I'm not sure what happened then. Someone can probably tell me. Cool, and I think this is actually the wrong weight as well. This is light, so let's change it to regular. And then if I swap these, I'll reset it. And then if I swap the right icon, it should still be regular, I hope. Change it for the Figma. Oh, and then there's that's not flattened properly, that icon. I need to go back and do that and republish the library. Yeah, that looks good. So cool. That's all working. This is the 20 by 20, yeah. All right, so we've got the properties for the left and right icon sorted. We just need to do the same for the text. So we'll drill down to the text layer. Make sure you're not on the text wrapper layer. We'll go to the actual text layer and we'll create a content property. So we'll go button text, and by default it's button. And then we'll create a layer property for the text wrapper because we want to include the padding in this. So we'll go layer here and we'll just say text. And we want it to be true. So now if we drag out an instance, you can see we can turn on and off the text. And then we can drill down to just having one icon, and then that's going to be our icon only. And it doesn't really matter if you use the left or the right. You'll just notice that if you have no icons and no text selected, you get this mess. So just don't deselect everything. I'll think about if there's a workaround for that and why it's defaulting to 126. That's probably how, yeah. It just defaults to the side, so you're not going to use an empty button anyway, so it's fine. So yeah, we have this component already running whereby we can modify the structure, swap out the icons, and do all of that good stuff from this component panel without having to dig into the nested layers. So we've got this whole column is done now, but what we don't have is the interactive states. So let's go ahead and create 4 variants of this component. And I'm going to go ahead and move it off this frame now, because I can just give this component frame a background and work on that. So we'll make it white and give it an auto layout and orient it to the right, because that's a bit neater. So default, this is fine. We just want it green, totally fine. Hover, maybe we want to indicate it with a little bit of a darkening of the background, so we'll just select green 600 for the hover. For pressed, again, a little bit deeper, so we'll go 700. For focus, we're just going to give it a focus ring, a blue focus ring of blue 500 that sits 2 pixels on the outside of the button. Now, I have realized I've forgotten an important interactive state, which would be disabled. So I'm just gonna copy it here so I remember. Type out disabled, and we'll create a disabled variant as well by duplicating this. And for disabled, we're just gonna have a really pale background, so we'll go down to green 200. Cool, and that's all the variants we need. And that is our primary button. By default, yeah, I'm just gonna get rid of those left and right icons like we discussed. And they'll still be operable from the component properties panel, they're just not gonna be shown by default. So we'll just hit them to false on the left icon and the right icon. And that's looking nice. Next thing we just wanna do is just change this property name to interactive states and make sure that they're all named properly. So default is fine, but this should be hover, pressed, disabled, and focus. So we have both of these columns done, but we don't have the button type specified. So let's get to that. I'm going to turn off the auto layout on this component frame, because what I'll do is highlight all of these and then press plus, And we have another set of buttons now that we're gonna work from. Just pull this in. I don't know if anyone else is as like nitpicking as me in regards to like margins even in your component frame, but I'm a bit over the top. So our secondary button, how can we style this? I think we're gonna make it gray background with dark text, just a subtle gray. So we'll go to gray 200 as the background, and we'll set the text to gray 800. For the hover state, we're gonna go a bit darker, so we'll go gray 300. For the pressed, we'll go gray 400. And for the disabled state, we're gonna keep it 200, but instead of white text, we'll use like gray 500 so that the contrast is reduced. Obviously the focus will be the same with gray 200. Nope, what was that? Yeah, like that. And I'm just gonna go ahead and swap the text on these for the gray 800. So that looks good. That's our secondary button. Just when you want a subtle button that's not necessarily commanding attention, it's not necessarily the most important action, but you still wanna have the user, you still wanna allow the user to interact with it. So we have our secondary button, and we're gonna go now for outline. So I'm just gonna go and copy out these secondary buttons again. And we're gonna go ahead and swap the gray, on these we'll swap the gray background for white again, base white, but we're gonna apply a stroke of gray 200. For the secondary, we'll give it a fill of gray 100 and a stroke of 200. For the pressed, we're gonna go 200, and we'll make the stroke 300. And for the disabled, we'll go white background again, and then we'll have 100 outline, and we'll keep this gray 400 as the button text so it really sinks into the background. Maybe we'll make the border actually gray 200. Cool. So we have 3 of our 4 button types. The last one is going to be ghost, so we're just going to go ahead and duplicate again this outline button group. We're going to go ahead and just remove the stroke from each one, so you don't want a stroke anywhere except for the focus, and you also don't want a background. So even though this is white background, we want to remove it. I think we'll keep the same hover state because we do actually want the background to appear on hover. So we're going to have this gray 100 hover state, and the press state can be the same. And then also for the inactive state, it's going to be the same, except again, we remove the background. I just want to make sure the background's removed. Cool, so we have our button, ghost button as well. Again, we just need to create a new variant, and we'll call this button type. And we just need to make sure that these are labeled correctly. So we'll call this primary, call this what is going on? Secondary, call these outline, and we'll call these ghost. So there you have a set of buttons, and we should have achieved all of this with only 20 buttons, whereas before, if you used base components and stuff and you had to have a different variant for the structure for each button, this would propagate out to I think 80 at least, 80 different instances. So this is really cool, and you can see this works. Let's just give it a little test. We'll drag out this outline button. Actually, no, we did one thing wrong. Because all of the icons were hidden, I'm gonna turn these on again. Yeah. So stupid. And just make sure that they're colored correctly. So these icons, for instance, I think we can just go ahead like that. Yeah, we'll just make sure they're darkened and here. This will be more difficult because the background's white, so I'm just gonna go ahead and select these out. No, we just want to change the selection. Yeah. Just make sure these are the right color, so grey 800. There's always something I miss, even doing a tutorial. I'm going to leave it in just to show you the sort of problem shooting that I have to do when I'm building components. And I'm sure there's a quicker way to do this. I'm sorry if it's excruciating to watch. I might speed it up. It's punishment to myself for messing up. So we're getting to the last one now. So this is the grey 800, and then we can go again here and just turn them off by default. Yeah, it's all neat. So if we go here again, turn on the right icon, it's going to be the right color, or the left icon as well. And again, we can swap out the icon instances here, and it's going to look all good. An anchor, yeah, call this. And you can change the text from the variants panel here. Something weird's happened with the interactive states. Okay, again, this is the ghost version, obviously. Primary, outline, secondary. Yeah, I'm just gonna check what's happened. Yeah, again. So just gonna make sure these are all interactive state default. These are all hover. This is just something that went wrong when I was copy and pasting. This is pressed. Disabled. Focus. Secondary outline. Yeah, cool. And then if you click here, this is a useful thing. If you click on the parent container of all the components, if there's an issue with your properties, it will display a warning here and you won't be able to publish them, but this is showing up all the properties. There's no warning, so it looks like they're good to go. Again, you can see here that we have this pretty cool flexible component that we can modify in terms of structure, interactive state, and button type really easily. It's taken, 20 minutes. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Make sure that you like and subscribe if you did. I'm going to be following up with some more tutorials on how to build important Figma components really simply. So thanks a lot. Have a great day and speak soon.